The Maha battle in Maharashtra. From there to the other battle, which is my central focus today. The National Monetisation Pipeline Plan, or NMP, announced by the Modi government yesterday, has now stirred a major political battle. The centre says it aims to raise 6 lakh crore rupees through the monetization of assets, including airports, highways, railways. The opposition says it's nothing more than a grand bargain sale of some of the country's prized assets that will lead to a monopoly of a few private companies close to the Modi government. It's Modi versus Rahul Gandhi in particular. Let's take a look at the battle lines over the NMP.
The Narendra Modi government's ambitious plan to raise 6 lakh crore rupees by monetizing national assets has sparked a political face-off. A day after Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman announced the initiative, the Congress has alleged the government decision was taken by keeping the stakeholders in the dark.
We clearly identified as infrastructure being the central pillar through which, if public expenditure happens, you're able to be sure that spillover effect, which itself can create that cycle of demand.
In order to collect 1.5 lakh crore a year by way of rents, you call it by whatever name, by way of rent, they are indulging in what I would call a grand bargain sale, a grand closing down sale.
Congress MP Rahul Gandhi has claimed the entire move is designed to help select business houses.
सबसे पहले जो स्ट्रेटेजिक इंडस्ट्रीज हैं उनको प्राइवेटाइज नहीं करा जाता था. अब यहां पे ये सारे के सारे प्राइवेटाइजेशन मोनोपोली बनाने के लिए करे जा रहे हैं. ये जो एसेट्स हैं इनको बनाने में 70 साल लगे हैं. ये पूरा का पूरा 3-4 लोगों के हवाले किया जा रहा है.
जिस सरकार ने राष्ट्र की तिजोरी को भरने का काम किया और कांग्रेस के लुटेरों से सुरक्षित किया, उस सरकार पर छीटाकशी करने का राहुल गांधी जी का प्रयास है. क्या राहुल गांधी का ये मानना है कि वो राज्य की सरकारें भी जो इस प्रकार का मोनेटाइजेशन कांग्रेस के नेतृत्व में कर रही हैं, वो सब अपने राज्यों को बेचने का काम कर रहे हैं?
The government's asset monetization project aims to raise 6 lakh crore rupees over 4 financial years. 14 sectors are included in the pipeline. 27% of the funds will be generated from roads and 25% from railways. The other sectors covered under the project include power generation and transmission, ports, airports, etc.
Ownership of assets remains with the government. That was a slide shown. I'm just showing it here. The ownership remains of those assets with the government, and there will be a mandatory hand back. They'll have to give back after a certain time. So let there not be any confusion, oh, this government is selling away. No, these are assets, brownfield, which will be still with the ownership of the government.
Big word of caution there by the Congress party as the Modi government embarks on its ambitious national monetization pipeline. But will we see a joint and coordinated effort by the opposition to stall this dilution of stakes in strategic assets, or will it be left at mere noise-making? With camera person Ritesh, this is Anand Patel in New Delhi for India Today.
Let me go to my first guest then tonight. My newsmaker Amitabh Khan joins me, the NITI Aayog CEO. Appreciate your joining us here, Mr. Khan. Let's start with the central purpose and intent of this National Monetization Pipeline, of which you are a driving force. The opposition says it is about a revenue-strapped government desperately hiving off valued public assets. The government says it's going to unlock value. What, according to you, is the core purpose and intent of this NMP, Mr. Kant?
So Rajdeep, asset monetization is nothing new. It's been going on for a very long time. The roads have been privatized. They've been used for bringing in operation, and maintenance of that has been done by the private sector for a very, very long time, actually, in this country. The Congress government in Maharashtra has just done asset monetization of the Pune-Mumbai expressway, and it's got a lot of resources out of that. So the objective of asset monetization, which is being practiced across the world, Australia, Indonesia, many countries, and we've given examples of this in our in yesterday's presentation as well, is really about enhanced capex spending and building world-class infrastructure. Secondly, you will have a multiplier impact on growth and employment. And thirdly, government is good at constructing certain things, but is very poor at operation and maintenance. And therefore, when the private sector comes in to operate and maintain, they will be able to raise more resources. There will be a revival of credit flow in the economy, and the proceeds from the monetized existing assets will lead to new infrastructure creation, and there will be a complete recycling of the future assets as well. So this is a virtuous cycle of more and more infrastructure to be created in the country. And if the country has to grow on a sustained basis over the next 3-decade period, it has to grow on the back of good quality infrastructure.
Let's come then to the core criticism. There's already those who believe public sector unions are going to raise the red flag in the manner that they claim the government is selling away its prized assets. There is the opposition, the Congress in particular, and I'm using the words of their leader, Jairam Ramesh here, who says this is organized loot and plunder. You are going to sell away scarce resources, particularly land. How do you intend to meet these criticisms out there?
So Rajdeep, let me first say that whoever says this has a very poor understanding of asset monetization, and it has been done in the past during the Congress period all through. Firstly, let me say that ownership of assets remains with government. There is no sale or no giving out of assets. Ownership remains with the government. There is a mandatory handback at the end of the tenure of the period. That is, it can be given out for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. These are structured contractual partnership with key performance indicators and performance standards. And these are brownfield de-risk assets, and the government brings in private sector to operate and maintain them. At the end of the period, these assets are returned back. So there are various models of this being practiced. For very long, NHAI and the state governments have been doing operation maintain transfers. We've been doing toll operate transfer. We've been doing operation maintenance development. Actually, even when I was in Kerala state, we were doing this. We've been doing rehabilitate, operate, maintain, transfer. The new models which have come out are InvITs, Infrastructure Investment Trusts, and REITs, which is Real Estate Investment Trust. These are structured financing vehicles. But in all these, the ownership remains with the government, and there is a mandatory handback at the end of the life of the period.
But the challenge surely remains, Mr. Kant, in ensuring a transparent system in terms of identification, supervision, and execution of the projects involving these assets. Will the identification of these potential partners be done by NITI Aayog? Will it be done by the concerned infrastructure ministry, by the PMO? And once an asset is leased to a private company, will the execution and the benefits accrue solely or mainly to the private enterprise?
So Rajdeep, yesterday's the National Monetization Pipeline has come out with about 20 plus asset classes. There are 12 line ministries and departments. The total NMP value over the next 4-year period is 6 lakh crore. On an average, it's about 1.5 lakh crores per year. Broadly, assets have been listed out. What are the potential models have also been listed out. The entities and ministries have been listed out. The indicative values have been given. But all this is subject to transparent, competitive bidding process through which the values will emerge. So you will have, for instance, you will have roads and expressways through NHAI. You will have power transmission lines through power grids. You can structure them through InvIT model. The ownership remains with the power grid. We've already done 5 assets via power grid InvITs. This year raising 7,700 crores. And actually 1,400 kilometers of roads has already been monetized with a value of 17,000 crores. So what is the new thing we are talking about?
No, I'll tell
it's
you,
just that we have expanded the scope of this into a larger area and a much greater force to bring in better efficiency in the economy, and also to enable new investments to be done in infrastructure.
Mr. Khan, I don't think anyone objects to much of what you're saying, but I'll tell you where the questions are coming. The critics fear that while you will talk of transparent bidding, invaluable public assets created over decades will end up being given to a chosen favored few. They say that is the experience with the Modi government in sectors like airports, where a single industrialist ends up creating some kind of a monopoly. That is the criticism being made. Eventually the beneficiaries will be favored companies, and that's the concern that critics have.
So, Rajdeep, let me tell you how absurd is this criticism. I live in a colony called the New Moti Bagh colony, and this is a classic case of asset monetization, where a piece of land during the Congress regime was auctioned out. It was bought by the Leela group of hotels. It was bought for about 750 odd crores. The hotel was constructed. It led to the creation of a completely new colony with new houses. And in addition to that, 300 crores was put back into the treasury of the government of India. So that is a classic case of asset monetization. There's nothing new. It's been going on for a very long time. Don't go by criticism for the sake of criticism. Country needs infrastructure. Country needs growth. Country needs credit flow. Country needs sustained growth for 3 decades or more. And all other countries in the world do this. There's nothing new about it. And this is the only way the country will move forward in good top-class infrastructure creation.
But there is a sense that perhaps this is part of the strategic disinvestment plan that the Modi government has unveiled. The worry, Mr. Kant, is the gap that exists in this country between intent and execution. That disinvestment in the past has been tardy. Even in financial year 2022, you set a target of 88,000 crores now for the year. We are already 5 months into it. How are you going to actually fast-track all this implementation, cut through bureaucratic procedures?
So we've already achieved some success in the road and power grid sector. We've laid down targets assigned to the ministries and departments. They have moved forward. There will be a monthly review through the Empowered Committee. There will be hand-holding for transaction. There's a real-time monitoring through dashboard. And there will be quarterly reviews by the Finance Minister. So this is the implementation plan. And we are quite hopeful that we'll crack it.
But even this target of 88,000 crores you intend to raise in this financial year, do you really believe it's possible in a rather subdued investment climate? Or are you simply a wish list? Is this just a wish list at the moment?
Of course, it can be met because the world is awash with liquidity. There's no shortage of money. All these packages that have been announced across the world is full of money. You need well-structured brownfield projects to be put out into the market. You'll get a very good response. The power grid InvIT was a classic example of that. It was oversubscribed in just 1.5 days.
I want to understand this, Mr. Khan. Did the government undertake stakeholders consultation while preparing this NMP? Was every nodal ministry consulted? Were the unions consulted? Are they all on board, or is this being driven in a way through NITI Aayog, PMO, everyone has to fall in line? Or is there a general acceptance that this is the only way forward?
So you would recall that after this was announced in the union budget in February 2021, right after that, the Prime Minister had asked all of us to do stakeholder consultation on national webinar. We We did several stakeholder consultations, after which we had held one-to-one meetings with ministries and stakeholder deliberations. So this has emerged out of very many rounds of discussions with the stakeholders and with the ministries concerned. This is a whole of government approach. Yesterday's release had all the secretaries present, everybody. It's a collaborative partnership of the entire government.
But my last question, is this coming, though, at a time when the economy is struggling? We are coming out of a COVID pandemic. It's a tough time. Do you really see this becoming a game changer as is being projected? Or is this, as some say, much more hype to create a feel-good factor for the Modi government in a tough investment climate?
So Rajdeep, several things in the economy work together. It's not, there is, you have to drive consumption, you have to drive private sector investment, you have to put good projects out, you have to drive credit flow into the economy. All this, there's a cycle of demand, there's a cycle of credit flow, all this has to happen. But the important thing is that government has done everything possible to ensure that country gets back into a high trajectory growth rate. And that is important. The effort through the asset monetization plan is to take India on a sustained growth path for a long period of time and to bring in new models like InvITs and REITs across several sectors of the economy.
Okay, let's leave it there. Amitabh Kant, you've given us a sense of what is the intent and purpose of the National Monetization Pipeline, a sense of the road ahead. Thanks very much for joining me tonight. I want to widen this. Thank you very much. I want to widen this beyond Mr. Kant to politicians now, as well as those who've been tracking the economy. Is this really about national interest or private benefit? Is the monetization pipeline, especially of railways, for example, backdoor disinvestment? Can the centre really convince all stakeholders to agree? Is the opposition being obstructionist, or do they have a claim that this will lead to monopolies? Vinayak Chatterjee is chairman of the CII's National Infra Council. I'm also joined by Syed Zafar Islam, BJP MP. Gaurav Ballabh is the Congress spokesperson. Siddharth Zarabi is managing editor at Business Today. Let's first start with you, Gaurav Ballabh, because the Congress has come out very strongly against this NMP. You may have heard what Amitabh Kant says. He says these are irrational. This criticism is for the sake of criticism. The Congress itself was unleashing the entire process of what he says is disinvestment at that time, now being called national monetization.
Rajdeep, it is a great closing down blunder which is announced by the Modi government. And if I will summarize the entire plan, it is the sale of public assets by using public sector banks' money to private sector. And in private sector also, who are those 2 or 3 people? No hint is required. Even a small kid in our country is aware that who is going to get the lease of these particular assets. It is a scheme to strengthen हम दो, हमारे दो, जो भी मिले उसे बेच दो. This is the nutshell. And I had 2-3 basic points which Mr. Kant is not there. Otherwise, I will ask him. First point, Rajdeep. The first point is that are these assets are going to be valued at current cost or their historical cost? And when I say current cost, means cost of replacement. Okay. Means if I'm going to replace these assets with new assets, is these assets are going to be to be valued at these? Number 2, he was telling the assets ownership will be with the government. I am asking Rajdeep, after 50 years, if the port is fully utilized, that ownership paper is just like a tissue paper. That is of no value. This is just, I can say, a window dressing transaction to take a bypass route and handing over all the 70 years of created public asset to the 2-3 people. Number 3 people, very politely I am asking that it is Prime Minister had announced on last 3 Independence Day speeches about 100 lakh crore National Infrastructure Pipeline. So I am asking, in last 2 years, because on every Independence Day he comes out with a figure of 100 lakh crore. How much investment is made till now? It means that this National Monetization Pipeline is only Narendra Modi plunder, nothing more, nothing less. And why I am saying this thing? Because now you are saying out of 100 lakh crore, 6 lakh crore is going to be generated from that. What is the source of remaining 94 lakh crore? Point number 4. It means this 6 lakh crore is also used for the day-to-day expenses of the government, because government is not having any revenue source, because you had killed the economy, the GDP, you took the nation 6 year back level as far as the GDP is concerned, and now you are handing over the public sector assets by using public sector banks money to the private sector, and not to the private sector only to people.
You've made lots of allegations. The central one, it seems, is you're using the money of public sector banks to benefit the private sector, is what you claim. You claim, therefore, that this is window dressing, and you claim that this will only lead to monopolies. Hum do, hamare do, bech do. Sorry, Syed Zafar. No, 1 minute. Zafar Islam, you want to respond to that? Because, you know, the concern of this monopolies was not clearly addressed by Mr. Khan. The concern that, for example, in the aviation sector, we've seen how airports have been principally cornered by the Adani Group, which had no previous experience in handling airports. Questions will therefore be raised. Is this being done to benefit a favored few? Your response?
Well, Rajdeep, first of all, let me tell you very candidly that before making a press conference, doing a press conference, Mr. Rahul Gandhi should have consulted people who understand economy in their party, like the former Prime Minister or Mr. Chidambaram, because this is something which is not new. It's not a new concept.
Mr. Chidambaram was sitting next to him, sir, and called it a grand bargain sale.
I'm really surprised when they are making this kind of allegation. Let me give you a very important example. First, BOT, build, operate, transfer. It's not a new concept. The concept was introduced by earlier government, and it is very well implemented. So first you build we are talking about the brownfield project. This is the greenfield project where you build, operate, and then you transfer. Once you transfer to the government, the ownership comes back to the government. What will happen? You have to monetize it. Monetize means you have to future flow. It is nothing but the securitization of future flow. Means future flow securitization is being done on all the assets which has the potential to generate enough cash in the future. So right now, what you do, you monetize that, means you securitize the future flow, what is potentially can be generated out of these assets, and you hand it over to the somebody who win the project for a certain defined period. That is being captured in the concession agreement. So you have the concession agreement which defines all the principle of future flow securitization. And after the period gets over, like 25 years, 30 years, 20 years, 15 years, 10 years, then the asset is always come back to the government. For example, let me give you one example. Since both of us are from Mumbai, Mumbai-Pune Express, something which Mr. Kant mentioned just now, that has been not once, many times it has been monetized for a certain period of time. Like recently it has been done, which since you have mentioned this, I will tell you 8,250 crore, which was this Maharashtra government has raised by monetizing this asset. What is this monetization? There is a flow of cash. Every day they are collecting.
So am I correct in saying?
Let me just complete, give you a full picture. So every day they collect. So instead of collecting every day in the government's coffer, they have given it to private operator who has given upfront fee. And that upfront fees, he has taken loan from the bank and paid it to the government. And of course, every day the collection is being given to banks. So there's the credit flow, what Mr. Khan was saying. There is a credit offtake, and there is, of course, this securitization of future flow.
You made your point.
Everything upfront.
You made your point, Mr. Mr. Islam. Now you made your point. You made your point. Let me take it to Vinayak Chatterjee. Mr. Vinayak, 1 minute, because it will become 3 against 1 at the moment. Mr. Vinayak Chatterjee, you know, you have looked at this sector very closely. We've seen in the past that the government all governments have, made commitments that they are going to focus on infrastructure. Large amounts of money are promised. Eventually, many of those projects do not fructify. And there are question marks that have been put over the years whether this model works. Do you believe, though, that this time, this National Monetization Pipeline is the way forward, given our past? And according to critics, it is being done in an arbitrary manner. You should only choose very carefully chosen strategic assets? It cannot just be any and every asset.
Rajdeep, you
Rajdeep,
didn't give me enough time.
there is,
Yes,
in
go
this debate, as in many economic debates, there is a lot of noise, there is a lot of political grandstanding, and therefore, let's just cut to the core issue. Is a recycling of public assets, is the recycling of state-owned assets, is it rooted in sound economic theory? The answer is a resounding yes. The national infrastructure, the National Monetization Pipeline, across economists, experts who are neutral to the political process, would all agree that it is based and rooted on sound economics, sound public policy, and sound fiscal policy. So once you agree that this is the case, and the fact that previous governments have demonstrated great interest and energy in doing the same thing, monetizing roads under the UPA government in BOT projects or Delhi-Mumbai airports or Delhi electricity privatization, it is just a carry-on of a process which earlier has been project-wise and today has been presented in a programmatic format. That's all there is to it.
So the criticism, Mr. Chatterjee, that previously the government would carefully choose the assets. Now you're even monetizing strategic assets, power transmission lines, you're going into mining, you're looking at highways and the entire railway infrastructure. Does that argument hold or not?
It does not. There is nothing strategic about privatizing roads. There is nothing strategic of privatizing railway assets. There is nothing strategic about monetizing ports. After all, some of India's most successful ports are privately owned. So are many successful and well-received airports. So let's not raise this strategic assets bogey unnecessarily. That way, every piece of mud in this country is strategic, somebody could argue. So let's not use the strategic bogey. The basic point is that asset recycling is accepted economic practice. A whole bunch of professional economists, including a bunch of infrastructure experts, headed and part of the Kelkar committee, in one of its recommendations has said that once public expenditure is over, the government should try to get the capital back, recycle it, and reinvest it in further projects in the country.
But what if that assets are, again, cornered by a few? What if the assets end up being cornered? How do you ensure that private monopolies are not built?
So I completely agree with you on that and all other commentators. If there are apprehensions of transparency and fair play, that should be addressed squarely, and the public should be convinced that the due process of governance, due process of transparency has been followed. If that is not done, then it discredits the whole process. So we have to have a governance role and a watchdog role on the fact that this is transparently done. I agree with you that it seems to be an apprehension, but that apprehension must be addressed head on, and transparency must be proved.
How do you address that, Siddharth Zarabi, as someone who's tracked all these sectors? How do you address this concern over transparency in the manner in which these assets will be hived off?
Rajdeep, this monetization exercise will involve 20 asset classes and 12 ministries, which is practically the entire economic part of the government of India. And I will argue that it is going to need professional structure, absolutely modern regulation, and definitely a structure that is not subject to court interpretation 10 years or 20 years down the line. Let's take telecom as an example. Telecom is one of the oldest, finest examples of the earliest generation, version 1 of public-private partnership. 30 years down the line, you have seen one particular judgment and its consequences in some ways going back in time. I don't want to go into that. Number 2 fact, why is this being done, Rajdeep, is the most significant part. Today, given the economic conditions, the post-pandemic Indian economy, and what has happened over the past 5-6 years, the government of India going ahead and directly borrowing 6 lakh crore, or even over a period of 4 years, which is the target amount to raise, assume that that was to be invested in infrastructure development. There is simply no way that the government can crowd out other borrowers and borrow this much. So what is really being done is, in some ways, raising funds to improve and expand on infrastructure, knowing fully well that privatization will be a political hot potato, and divestment of public sector assets has pretty much reached the maximum possible. There's only LIC
Siddharth,
left, Rajdeep.
But Siddharth, the central question, how do you ensure against the emergence of private monopolies? How do you put in place some kind of system that ensures, for example, and I give the example of airports, which is being cited again and again, that one company without really any previous experience doesn't monopolize every new airport project in the country?
Faster arbitration, better arbitration, perhaps not a new structure, but more effective implementation of the mandate of the Competition Commission of India, for example. Rajdeep, just one quick example. A leading hotel in Delhi is one of the finest and oldest examples of monetization, and it ran into trouble when the lease had to be renewed. You know the entire saga. I'm not taking names here because there wasn't a framework. It was a municipal body-led decision. The least, and Vinayak will support me here, the least that can be done with such an ambitious plan is to ensure that it does not go the way of Valco and XZL. Right. That is the Congress legacy. That is the legacy of a former Attorney General. That is the legacy of the communists who have put up every possible hurdle on a private investor. So I would say, along with this plan, a governance framework is also necessary. Perhaps club all these ministries into one, I don't care. But it will not happen, and I hope no one gets me wrong, it will not happen with the current administrative structure. I've spent 24 years tracking various iterations of public-private partnership. Right. It will not happen in the current administrative structure. The intent needs a new executive functioning system of delivery.
You want to respond to that, Gaurav?
Yeah.
Because in a way, here are experts saying, look, this is the way forward. There is no other way. Forget about what Syed Zafar Islam. He's BJP. But even experts, observers have said you need to in some way monetize your assets. It happens across the world.
I don't want to have one-to-one with the experts, but I had a very simple question to experts. From transmission line to railway line, from ports to harbors to the telecom towers. Is transmission line is not a strategic asset? If in a country transmission line is not a strategic asset, there can't be any strategic asset for any country, because without electricity, nothing can work in the entire country. Point number one. Point number two, the argument that this is not sale, this is lease. Now, Rajdeep, I'm just asking, if an asset is having a life of 50 years and you are giving that asset on lease for 50 years, then the value of asset is zero. This is simple sale. You don't try to dress the transaction. Everybody understands the intent of the transaction. Everybody understands the spirit of the transaction. So don't mislead the people of our country. So third point. Wait. Then I will hear your all interjections. Point number three. I am asking, I had asked a very simple question. That are these assets are going to be leased out, the lease rentals are going to be determined at replacement cost? Can anybody guarantee that is it a replacement cost? What is the current replacement cost of converting all these highways, buying new land and making these highways? What is the replacement cost of having a new railway?
Gaurav, you made that point earlier, which is not... You made that point earlier, but I just want clarity. The one point I'm not getting a clear answer on, and I think Siddharth Zarabi said governance structures. Syed Zafar Islam, how can you ensure that the principal criticism today is that this will be hum do hamare do? That's the opposition's slogan. The broader question is it will lead to cronyism. How are you going to ensure that this doesn't lead to cronyism? I want a straight answer.
Well, Rajdeep, see the governance model we have in last 7 years. We have demonstrated that we follow the transparent process, and this also will happen through the bidding process. So we will follow it very.
That's not true. That's not true, sir. That's not true. There are still question marks. There were question marks over the UPS distribution of natural resources, for example, coal. There are also question marks over the way you have gone through what you call a transparent bidding process, but which only seems to benefit a few, whether it's in telecom or whether it's in aviation.
Not at all. Not at all. When you talk about a particular business group, just see their strike rate in terms of they have bid on for various assets. but they have not been able to get those assets because they were not successful bidder. So we have followed the process. We will continue to follow the process. But let me give you some example, Rajdeep, which earlier
very quickly
you didn't allow me to come. Yes. See, for instance, road sector, we are talking about the road sector. We have a HAM project, hybrid annuity model. Means what has happened? The government of India is expending money there, providing equity support. After a certain period of time, this asset will be available with the government. What will the government will do? They will have to monetize this asset to generate revenue. When they have the revenue upfront, they will keep investing those as equity for creating more infrastructure so that more employment can be generated, more revenue can be generated.
That's a fair argument again, but Vinayak Chatterjee, in conclusion, as a representative of industry, do you believe that there is a complete buy-in here? You yourself have reflected the apprehensions in a way that some people also have, even within industry privately concede the fear. Just a minute, sir. The fear of monopolies. The fear
he didn't understand the concept he's talking about the replacement cost. How does the replacement cost come in the picture? Here is the bidding process where highest bidder will get the get the
one simple.
So where is the question of replacement cost?
Rajdeep, give me 20 seconds.
Let me ask the professor accept
only 20 seconds.
Let him respond.
Okay, you want to respond quickly respond, Professor.
Rajdeep,
no, Professor, I'm asking you a question.
Rajdeep, Lucknow Airport, Guwahati Airport, Bombay Airport, only to one bidder. ये संयोग नहीं है, ये प्रयोग है. This is not coincidence.
I have to give it. No, okay, I have to give it to Vinayak Chatterjee. I know it's noisy. No, away from the political partisanship. No, just I have run out of time. Vinayak Chatterjee, 20 seconds. Do you believe that the government can ensure that this principal argument of monopolies being built through this process can be avoided? You know, the charge is whether it's Ambani's in telecom or whether it's Adani's in aviation, we cannot have a repeat.
The government, whichever government is there in power, whether it was UP earlier or BJP and NDA now, will have to demonstrate to the citizens of this country that such processes are being handled transparently and with complete transparency in all government norms. Without that, the country will not be able to progress forward. I think it is a prime requirement.
But it is a step forward. Many believe in terms of intent at least. The real challenge, as always in this country, will be execution and governance models that are to be put in place. Thank you all very much for joining me.